She pushed a mop across the courtroom floor while the judge mocked her under his breath. "Clean the mess and stay out of the way," he sneered. No one objected, no one cared, until she pulled out a Supreme Court badge, right there, in front of everyone. Turns out, the janitor wasn't cleaning up the courtroom. She was cleaning up the justice system itself. So, what happens when the person you dismiss turns out to hold all the power? Before we dive into this powerful story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more true stories that challenge bias, inspire courage, and speak truth to power. Thank you. It was just past 8 a.m. in Willow Creek Courthouse. The morning sun filtered through the high windows, brushing pale gold across the polished wooden pews. A janitor pushed her cleaning cart down the center aisle, unnoticed, unbothered. Her name tag read, R. Ellis, and her blue uniform hung loosely over a frame that moved with quiet purpose. The courtroom was already filling, lawyers reviewing notes, jurors whispering hellos, a judge soon to enter with practiced routine. No one looked twice at the older black woman near the back, nor at the way she paused now and then, not to rest, but to observe. To them, she was just another custodian. But Rosa Ellis wasn't there to mop the floor. She was there to witness something, and maybe, just maybe, to change everything. And the moment someone crossed the line, she would. The courthouse in Willow Creek didn't smell like justice. It smelled like dust, old carpet, and the burnt coffee left too long on a hot plate. The sun filtered through the stained glass windows above the entrance, casting long, sleepy streaks of light across the marble floor. No one paused to notice them, least of all the woman pushing a cleaning cart across them. Rosa Ellis moved slowly, not because of age, though she had plenty of it, but because she knew how to go unseen. Her blue janitor's uniform was faded at the elbows and too large in the shoulders. The badge clipped to her chest read, Maintenance, Temp, and no one questioned it. Her gray curls were tucked beneath a modest cap. People passed her with the same regard they gave the water fountain or the trash can, there. But not part of anything important. She reached the courtroom doors just as they opened. A stream of townsfolk filed in, eager for something to talk about over lunch. A young man in an orange jumpsuit was led to the defendant's chair. Head bowed, wrists chained with more symbolism than necessity. His name was Darius Milton. Rosa had read it before she ever saw his face. From her place at the back, Rosa took a seat in the far corner, leaving her card tucked neatly beside a column. She didn't bring a notebook, just a folded piece of paper hidden in her palm, lined with codes and quiet observations from weeks past. The judge entered with the flair of someone used to attention. Harold Carter was tall, silver-haired, and wore his robe like a crown. His presence made people sit straighter, or smaller, depending on which side of the room they were on. Behind him followed Martin Reeves, the district attorney, young, sharp-suited, and already smirking before the hearing even began. Reeves leaned in to Carter and whispered something that made the judge chuckle. The kind of laugh that didn't reach the eyes. Rosa watched without blinking. She'd seen that laugh before, in courtrooms like this one, from men like that. The bailiff called the room to order, and Rosa shifted in her seat. Her knees ached, but she didn't move, her gaze fixed on the bench where Carter sat. She wasn't there for comfort. She wasn't even there to clean. Not really. Carter glanced briefly around the room, sweeping over the gallery with bored disinterest, until his eyes landed on Rosa. He didn't recognize her. Of course he didn't. His smirk curled a little more. He turned to Reeves and nodded toward the back of the room. This city's full of trash, he muttered. No matter how much you clean, some of it just sticks around. That old lady's a prime example. Rosa didn't flinch. She simply closed her fingers around the folded paper in her hand, and didn't blink. The courtroom had fallen into its usual rhythm, the kind Rosa had seen play out dozens of times before, though never from quite this close. The hum of legal procedure filled the air, the clack of heels on tile. Papers shuffled with feigned urgency, the drone of opening statements echoing off paneled walls. But Rosa wasn't here to listen to the words. She was here to watch the spaces between them. From the back row, half shadowed by the tall wooden trim, she kept her gaze fixed on Harold Carter. He sat upright, hands folded in front of him like a preacher ready to deliver judgment. His expression was neutral, almost bored, but Rosa had spent enough time in courtrooms to recognize performance when she saw it. The tilt of his chin when the defense attorney spoke, the narrowing of his eyes when a black juror nodded along, all of it was theater. Carefully rehearsed. The defense tried to show a grainy video clip, security footage from the night Darius Milton was arrested. A figure could be seen. Yes, but only vaguely. The face was turned away. Still, the lawyer pressed on, citing timestamp evidence, arguing that the figure wasn't Darius at all. Carter barely looked at the screen. Unreliable, he said, waving a hand. It doesn't show the suspect's face. The court will not waste time on speculation. Rosa blinked. Slowly, she slid her hand into her coat pocket, feeling for the small spiral notepad tucked just behind the fabric. She scribbled 2 short lines. Then a symbol, one she'd used before, shaped like an inverted triangle. It meant, dismissed without review. Martin Reeves leaned forward at the prosecution's table. His lips curled ever so slightly. Not quite a smirk, more like satisfaction trying to remain polite. Rosa watched him too. He didn't glance back at her, not even once. Darius hadn't spoken. He sat hunched forward, hands on his knees, face slack, every time a point was raised in his favor and shot down. His body shrank just a little more. Rosa wondered how many times he had rehearsed this moment in his head, if he had dared to picture anything but this. Carter interrupted a witness, an older woman who had offered Darius an alibi. She said she'd seen him at the gas station across town when the theft supposedly occurred. The judge frowned. You expect this court to take the word of someone with no affiliation to the accused? No documentation? This isn't a charity hearing. Ma'am. The woman hesitated, flustered. Rosa could see her eyes dart to the gallery, seeking reassurance. She didn't find it. Rosa shifted her weight, slowly pushing her cart along the edge of the room. When she bent to adjust the mop, her ear passed close to the bench where 2 security officers stood casually leaning. Their voices were low, but not careful. Waste of a lawyer. That guy, one said. Doesn't matter. That kid's going away. Just a matter of time. Rosa's hand paused. The mop settled without a sound. She straightened up, eyes fixed forward. Carter's gavel struck once. Not hard, but enough to silence the soft murmur of the crowd. Let's proceed, he said, and the sound of shuffling papers filled the room again. Rosa didn't return to the back of the room. Instead, she gripped the mop handle tighter and walked slowly, almost reverently, toward the front. To the space just near the edge of the judge's platform. The tile there had been scuffed. But Rosa wasn't looking at the floor. She was listening to the tone Carter used when he addressed Reeves. The subtle difference in deference. Listening to the long silences when defense spoke. Listening to what this courtroom had learned to tune out. As she paused beside the bench, Carter's eyes landed on her again. This time, his gaze lingered. He didn't say a word. But the look was unmistakable. He saw her now, not as a person, as an interruption, an annoyance. Rosa tilted her head just slightly. Not in defiance, in memorization. She wasn't just watching anymore. She was recording. The courtroom lights had been dimmed for the lunch recess, casting a softer hue over the stained wood and tired tiles. Rosa pushed her cart out through the side corridor, the mop handle squeaking softly against the frame of the door. She didn't need to be anywhere in particular. No one had asked her to be. That was the thing about being invisible. You could choose where you stood, and nobody questioned it. She took the back hallway, one that looped behind the judge's chambers and break room. The paint along the baseboards was chipped, and the air smelled faintly of burnt toast. Rosa had never gone this way before, not on paper. Anyway, but her memory had mapped out every step, every detour, every shortcut where voices thought they couldn't be overheard. The door to the break room was half closed, but not latched. Rosa paused, one hand still resting on the handle of her cart. A soft hum of conversation filtered through. Then a laugh, sharp and sudden. Carter's voice. She actually tried to use that gas station footage. He scoffed, followed by the clink of a spoon against ceramic. I swear, I haven't seen a more hopeless case in years. Kid looked like a deer in headlights, if the deer had no business being on the road. Another voice answered him. Martin Reeves. I'm telling you, it's cleanup duty. That's all this is. You see them coming. You clear the docket. Don't waste too much ink. Carter snorted. You know what really gets me? That janitor lady, Ellis, or whatever's on her badge, sits there like she's watching a movie where the underdog wins. This isn't TV. Nobody gives a damn what she thinks. Their laughter rose again, filling the small break room with the ease of two men who believed they were safe. Believed they were alone. Rosa didn't step back. She didn't breathe, not loudly. Her hand tightened around the rag in her pocket until the soft cotton bunched and twisted in her palm. She could feel the pulse in her fingers now, slow and deliberate, like the sound of a ticking clock. She thought about her son. Years ago, before the robe, before the bench, before anyone ever called her, Your Honor. She remembered how it felt when he told her he'd been stopped by the police for walking home at dusk. Nothing had happened, thank God, but his face when he said it, that tight, practiced smile, that quiet lie of, I'm fine. She thought about how she'd promised herself that day, that if she ever had a chance to change what justice looked like, she wouldn't waste it. In the room ahead, the voices dropped, a chair creaked. Carter was saying something low now, something Rosa could barely hear. That boy ought to be grateful, he murmured. He's lucky he's not walking out of here in cuffs for something worse. Rosa reached into the breast pocket of her uniform. Her fingers closed around a slim black device. She thumbed the side and heard the faint click of activation. She didn't need to catch everything. Just enough. Just enough for truth to stop hiding behind robes and titles. She stepped back, letting the door slowly drift shut again until it caught on the latch. The hallway was quiet once more. The only sound the faint buzz of a vending machine and the wheels of her cart rolling back into motion. But something in her pace had changed. There was no hesitation now. No doubt. She knew what had to come next. The courtroom returned to order with the same dull thud of the gavel. Like someone knocking on an old table to test if it still held weight. The people filed back into their seats. Rosa moved with them, though not back to the far row where she had sat before. This time, she pushed her cart slowly down the side aisle, closer to the jury box, closer to the front. No one stopped her. No one questioned the woman in the janitor's uniform who rolled a mop bucket past the wooden divider and parked it neatly just behind the railing. She adjusted her gloves, glanced at the wet rag draped over the edge of the cart, then folded her hands over it, quietly watching. The defense attorney rose again, less confident than before, as if the weight of futility was slowly pressing his shoulders downward. He began referencing the Sixth Amendment, the right to a fair trial, the guarantee of impartiality, the necessity of letting the defense be heard. Judge Carter interrupted. The Constitution is not a get-out-of-jail-free card, he said, tone sharp enough to sting. It was written for the moral man, not for the kind of defendant sitting here today. A few in the courtroom stirred. Someone near the front cleared their throat. But no one spoke. Darius kept his eyes low, hands resting limply in his lap. His lawyer sat down without another word. And Rosa let go of the mop handle. She stepped away from the cart. It was not dramatic. There was no music, no sudden gasp from the crowd. Just the soft squeak of her soles against the floor as she walked, measured, steady, toward the railing near the judge's bench. She didn't rush. Her breathing was even. One of the bailiffs shifted when she crossed the invisible line between part of the background and part of the scene. He started toward her with a half-raised hand, uncertain whether to speak. Then she reached into the inside pocket of her uniform and pulled out a small silver rectangle. It caught the light like a coin on a clean table. A murmur passed through the room before the words were even read. United States Supreme Court, Special Ethics Oversight. Rosa held it at chest height, not to flash it, not to boast, but to confirm what had, until now, seemed impossible. That someone like her didn't just exist in the corners. That someone like her could be the one holding the ledger instead of mopping up after the mistakes of others. The juror nearest her leaned forward slightly, jaw open. Judge Carter didn't move. Rosa's voice, when it came, was low and calm. It didn't rise to fill the chamber. It didn't need to. I'm not here to clean your floor, she said. I'm here to clean the system that's rotting under your bench. The room froze. Time didn't. She stepped back once, not out of fear, but to give the room space to breathe. And maybe, for the first time since the trial began, someone truly did. There are silences that settle like fog, heavy and clinging, refusing to lift. That was the kind of silence that filled the courtroom after Rosa Ellis's words. The buzz of fluorescent lights above seemed louder than usual. The soft creak of someone shifting in a bench became a thunderclap in the hush. Judge Carter stood up so fast his chair groaned behind him. His face, usually a confident mask of stern authority, had turned the shade of porcelain, not red with rage, not flushed with righteousness, but pale. He opened his mouth, perhaps to object or assert control. But before any sound escaped, Rosa moved. She raised the badge first. Not with dramatics, but with the quiet power of someone who didn't need to prove anything. The seal of the United States Supreme Court caught the light. The words beneath it, Special Ethics Oversight, were met with no applause. No cries, but a collective stillness. Recognition can be louder than disbelief. Then came the folder. A simple manila binder, thick with pages marked in blue tabs and red stamps. Rosa laid it gently on the bench beside her. Her voice, when it came, was clear, low, unshaken. My name is Rosa Ellis. I was assigned to this district 7 months ago by the Special Ethics Division of the Supreme Court. My role was to evaluate patterns of judicial behavior in counties with disproportionate incarceration rates among people of color. She didn't look at Carter when she said it. She didn't need to. Her eyes scanned the courtroom, jurors, lawyers, clerks, citizens, and found each one willing, or not, to listen. Over the last 3 years, she continued, Judge Carter has presided over 126 criminal trials. Of those, 83% involved defendants who were Black or Hispanic. Her hands turned the first page of the file. In more than 60% of those cases, defense motions to submit additional evidence were denied, without judicial explanation. And in nearly every case where a witness for the defense was dismissed, it was done based on what this court referred to as instinct or credibility concerns, unsupported by formal process. No one spoke. Darius Milton looked up for the first time since the trial had begun. There was something new in his eyes, not hope. Not yet, but the early stirring of it. His hands, which had been clasped so tightly they'd turned pale, loosened just a little. Rosa's fingers paused on one page. Her gaze lifted again. I am not here to argue. I am not here to accuse. The facts are here, she said, motioning to the binder. Signed, sealed, and independently verified. Reviewed by 3 federal auditors before being placed in my hand. The defense attorney leaned forward, his face slack with the relief that comes from being believed, even if only for a moment. The prosecutor said nothing, his pen resting awkwardly in his hand. Forgotten mid-note. Carter hadn't sat back down. His jaw moved slightly, as if weighing which words might still matter. But Rosa wasn't done. She walked to the bench and placed the file there, neatly. Respectfully, but without hesitation. It landed with a soft thump that somehow carried more weight than any gavel. She looked directly at Carter then. Not with anger, not even with judgment, with clarity. I'm not asking you to believe me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet heard by every ear in the room. I'm asking you to read what you signed. The air inside the courtroom had thickened, as if time itself was unsure whether to keep moving forward. Judge Carter remained standing, fingers twitching slightly at his sides. He reached for the file Rosa had placed on the bench, flipping through it with rushed, impatient hands, as though he could discredit it simply by turning the pages fast enough. His voice cut through the silence, sharp and strained. You're telling me you're a federal investigator? He said, raising his head, his tone laced with disbelief dressed up as humor. Since when does the Supreme Court send janitors to do oversight work? He chuckled, but it was the kind of laugh that doesn't wait for others to join in. It died in the air, unnoticed. Rosa didn't flinch. She simply stood, composed, hands folded in front of her, allowing the silence to stretch as long as it needed to. Her calm was louder than his sarcasm. And then, from the right side of the gallery, came a sound that shifted the whole room. A chair scraped gently against the floor. Every head turned. Linda Bowman, the court clerk who had worked under Carter for over a decade, rose slowly to her feet. Her blazer hung slightly off one shoulder, and she gripped a folder in both hands like someone carrying something too heavy for its size. Her face was pale, But her jaw was set. "I can't stay quiet anymore," she said, her voice soft but steady. Carter's eyes narrowed. "Ms. Bowman." Linda didn't look at him. She looked at Rosa. 3 years ago, she began, "I filed an internal complaint about being pressured to alter transcripts. It involved a trial where evidence for the defense was removed from the official record. I was told it was an administrative error." She paused, and her hands tightened slightly around the folder. "The complaint was dismissed, quietly, no follow-up, just a conversation in your chambers," she said, turning briefly toward Carter, "where I was reminded that loyalty was more important than accuracy." Someone in the back of the room gasped. A murmur rippled through the rows like a breeze before a storm. Martin Reeves shifted in his seat, his fingers pulling at the cuff of his sleeve. His eyes darted to Carter, then to Rosa, then quickly back down to the table in front of him. "I stayed quiet because I thought I had no choice," Linda continued. "I told myself it wasn't my fight. That maybe I misunderstood, but I didn't. I see that now." She stepped forward, just far enough that her voice could reach every corner of the room without needing to rise. "I read the numbers. I watched the hearings. I helped type the orders. I saw the patterns long before Rosa Ellis ever walked into this building with a mop and a badge." Carter looked frozen, his lips slightly parted but no words coming out. The room was watching him now, but not like they used to. The certainty was cracking. Darius Milton, still in his seat at the defense table, blinked hard. He brought a hand to his mouth, as though trying to hold in a breath that had waited too long to escape. One of the jurors, an older woman in a floral blouse, gave the faintest nod, as if something long unsaid had finally been spoken aloud. Linda's voice lowered, but not her resolve. "I've worked under you for 7 years. Judge Carter. I was proud of that once. But today," she turned back toward Rosa, "today, I choose justice." And just like that, the silence changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was ready. The room didn't explode. It didn't erupt. It simply shifted, like a floorboard finally giving way after years of pressure. Carter took a half step back from the bench, one hand hovering as though reaching for something invisible. His voice was clipped, thinner than usual, barely hiding the tension underneath. "This court is being disrupted," he said. "I will not allow it to be hijacked, officer." But before his sentence could land, 2 figures in plain suits stood quietly from the gallery's last row. They didn't move fast. They didn't speak loud. They simply raised their badges at chest height and walked toward the center aisle. "Federal Oversight Division," the older one said, his voice calm, "practiced. We confirm the credentials and authority of Investigator Rosa Ellis. She is acting under full jurisdiction granted by the Supreme Court." The other man added, "Per Article 7, Section 3 of Judicial Review, any motion to remove her would be unlawful at this stage." Carter's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted toward Reeves, whose complexion had turned a shade too close to the courtroom walls. Neither said a word. The performance was over. The defense attorney didn't raise his voice either. He simply stood, gently placing his hand on Darius's shoulder. His tone was steady, but his words carried like thunder. Given the verified evidence of judicial bias, the unlawful suppression of exculpatory material, and the recorded comments made by both the presiding judge and the prosecutor, my client moves for immediate acquittal. Rosa reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a small flash drive. She handed it to one of the federal agents without ceremony. "This contains the recording from the break room," she said. "You'll hear them refer to the defendant as trash, and discuss how to clear the docket without reviewing defense evidence." She turned to the court clerk, who received a printed copy of the same transcript. The judge no longer had the floor. He had a file. The room stilled again, but this time it was listening, absorbing. The jury didn't retreat. They didn't need to. The foreperson stood on her own, eyes moving from Rosa to Darius, then briefly to the bench. "We've heard enough," she said softly. "The jury finds the defendant not guilty." The words cracked something open. Darius broke down, shoulders trembling, tears falling without resistance. His father, who had sat silent and still through every minute of every day, stood and wrapped both arms around his son. He didn't speak. He just held on, as if afraid someone might try to take the boy back. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then louder. It wasn't loud because of celebration, it was loud because it had been waiting too long. A woman near the back whispered through her tears. She did what nobody dared. Carter didn't argue. He didn't slam his gavel. He didn't shout. 2 officers, now on federal instruction, moved toward him. One leaned in close, speaking quietly. The judge's shoulders slumped. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and allowed himself to be led out the side door. Martin Reeves rose slowly from his chair, eyes glassy. He didn't follow. He didn't flee. He just sat back down. Rosa stood near the center of the room. She hadn't moved much since the verdict. But now, she approached Darius and his father. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She only offered a hand. Firm and quiet. Darius took it. His voice shook. "I don't even know how to thank you." She looked him in the eyes. "You don't owe anyone thanks," she said gently. "You just owe the truth. Live like it means something." He nodded, said nothing more. And the courtroom, once a stage for prejudice, now held a silence that felt like reverence. The crowd had slowly emptied out, their footsteps fading into the marble halls like an echo that knew its way home. Some still lingered outside, talking in hushed tones, heads bowed as if the sunlight itself demanded reverence. Inside the courtroom, quiet finally returned, not the stiff, restrained silence of before, but something softer, something earned. Rosa remained standing near the front, where Darius had sat, where Carter had judged. For a long moment, she didn't move. The room seemed to breathe differently now. The weight it had carried all morning had lifted. Though not completely. Some things never leave entirely. She turned, walking back toward the corner where her cart still stood. It looked smaller now, or maybe she had grown past it. The worn rubber wheels hadn't moved an inch, and the mop still leaned patiently like an old friend waiting to be called back to duty. Her hand reached for the cart, fingers brushing the handle, not to take it, but to say goodbye. That cart had been her shield, her silence, her disguise. In a place where she couldn't speak freely, it had given her permission to observe, to listen, to endure. It had made her invisible. And now, it had done its part. She left it by one of the stone columns near the door, the mop handle tilting slightly under its own weight. No one would touch it now, not out of neglect, but because they knew it meant something more than cleaning supplies. Linda Bowman approached slowly, her heels clicking softly against the floor. There was a question in her eyes before it even left her mouth. "Will you be back?" she asked, voice careful, uncertain. Rosa gave a small smile, not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from knowing you've done what you came to do. "I don't need to be," she replied. "Someone else will, as long as they don't stay quiet." Linda looked down, then nodded, as if tucking those words somewhere she could return to later, when courage might waver again. Near the back of the room, a young boy walked past with his mother, his eyes wide and curious. He tugged gently at her coat sleeve. "Mom, who was that lady?" His mother glanced toward Rosa, then knelt beside her son. Her voice was barely louder than a whisper, but it carried all the weight in the world. "She's the one who made the law remember what it's supposed to be." Rosa said nothing. She simply walked toward the heavy wooden doors and stepped outside. Sunlight poured over the courthouse steps, spilling across the stone like gold spilling from a jar. The people who had once filled the gallery now lined the walkway. Not clapping, not cheering, but standing, just standing. Some with hands clasped in front of them, some with tears on their cheeks, some with nothing but silence. They didn't know what to say, so they didn't, and that, in its own way, was enough. At the top of the steps, Rosa paused and turned back. Her eyes scanned the building one last time, the flags, the columns, the place where justice had been both broken and restored. Then she looked through the open doors, to where her cart still stood in shadow. Her voice was quiet, steady, meant more for the marble walls than the people behind them. Justice cannot lie where bias holds the scale. Then she stepped into the light, and the cart stayed behind, alone but not forgotten, lit by the last soft gold of afternoon. She didn't raise her voice, but the room got quiet anyway. No verdict could have spoken louder than the way people looked at her as she walked out, like they'd seen something they hadn't expected, but maybe always needed to. The mop stayed behind, Under a shaft of sunlight no one dared step across. And maybe that's what justice looks like sometimes, not loud, not swift, just undeniable. How many others still carry truth in silence, waiting for the day they're finally seen? If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a question, or even just a pause, subscribe to Undercover Truths for more stories that echo long after they end. Thank you for watching.